You were going to go on site.
Today we'll take a look at some behind the scenes of a travel job that I shot, which included an interview and B-roll package. This was shot for a client that I shoot for a few times a year, and there's always some travel involved. Since the company has customers all over the US, I've shot in a few different states for them. This particular shoot was about a 4-hour drive from where I live and involved shooting in 2 locations in one day. First on the agenda was to meet with my point of contact and their customer at their office to set up for an interview. So in this video, we'll dive into the lighting breakdown, which took place in a classically boring conference room. I always make sure to leave myself plenty of time when I travel so that I can maximize my setup time, which in this instance allowed me to experiment a bit with how I wanted to light the subject. Upon arriving on site, I was greeted with the always challenging conference room. This day saw overcast skies, so there wasn't a whole lot of daylight filling in the room tone. So rather than battle the overhead lights, I leaned into them and used them to my advantage, which you'll see in the final look. Before setting up any stands or bringing in any equipment, I always like to get a general sense of where the camera position will be in relation to where the subject will be seated. I opted to not include a window for a few reasons, which made life easier for me. The first reason was, without any windows in the frame, I wouldn't need nearly as much output to light the subject. And the next reason was, by not including a window, I wouldn't be battling the overhead lights. I also wouldn't need to turn them off, and therefore didn't need to add a bunch of my own lighting to lift the ambient level of a dark room. So my thinking was to shoot into the corner of the room towards the TV, and from here I began setting up a key light while also brainstorming what I could do to create some interest on the wall behind the subject. My preference is to always use the largest key light source I can, and as much as possible double diffuse my light. In this space there was only so much space to work with, and it made it even more challenging since we were unable to lift or move the conference table. So sometimes you just have to do what you have to, which meant keying with a smaller source. I did bring the light dome with me, but there wasn't enough space to accommodate the depth of it. So a simple lantern would have to do the trick for this one. Before committing to this setup, I had first asked if they could put the company website up on the TV, or if they had any video that could be played on it during our interview. And if they didn't, I would have changed things up, but fortunately, I didn't have to.
Will do.
Next, I leaned on my go-to fixture for interviews and thought about creating some texture on the wall that could further help add some interest. I tried a few different things here, but the background projection just wasn't doing it for me, and I decided to use it in a different way. So I brought it around to the key side with the intention of hitting the subject with some hard light in addition to the soft key light from the lantern. Going with the standard far side key, I had a stand-in sit-in position, which helped me dial in the color temp, the output, and the positioning that I wanted of the projector. If you start to look for this combination of lighting where there's a soft light on the face and a hard light hitting the body of a character, you'll see this done all of the time in films and television. The hard light helps add another layer of realism that our eyes are already accustomed to seeing in the natural world. This can be an easy way to level up a standard interview shot and is a great tip to keep in your back pocket for when you might be feeling like your frame is just lacking that little something extra. Everyone loves to talk about shallow depth of field and cinematic interviews, but oftentimes shooting a lens wide open for interviews just isn't the way to go. And that could be for a few reasons. Sometimes you actually want to see into the space that you're shooting. This can help add context to what the subject is saying, or maybe the space you're shooting is part of the B-roll, which will be seen in the final video. In this case, I just wanted to see some color and movement behind the subject, and the TV helped give us just that. Since we were unable to move the table, that meant that the subject was very close to the background, which is never ideal. So, shooting wide open in this instance was the way to go. I went around the room taking readings of the overhead lights and then matched my lights to them. As I mentioned, normally you'd want to turn these lights off, but I kept them on so I didn't have to use more lights to light up a dark room. There's no need to make life difficult for yourself, especially if you're a crew of one, as I was here. So, as much as possible, I lean into the constraints of the space that I'm dealt and the lighting within that space. Usually, I'll add a topper of some kind, like a flag or a 5-in-1, to block the overhead lights from hitting the subject. But here I just used it as my hair light. If you're anything like me, you're definitely your own worst critic, and I'm always striving to get better and continue to one-up myself from the previous job. And with that said, is this the best looking interview I've ever shot? No, but it's plenty good enough, and while that's never the goal, it's in times like this one where my experience will kick in and help me realize it's good enough and that I should move on. I kept audio on this project simple and just used the Rode Wireless Pros fed into the FX6. For lenses, I'm on the Sigma 35-1.4, which I think was wide open or close to. The subject for this interview was not only super knowledgeable, but overall just a really good sport about being on camera, which understandably is or can be intimidating for most people, especially if it's not something they've done before. So as much as you might want to have some big elaborate setup to impress a client, sometimes it's best to just keep things simple with just a camera and a light or two. That's all I've got for you in this one. See ya.
I thought I was just going to come in here and kill it. It's so embarrassing, man. I feel there's a lot of respect for people that do this now.